February 26, 1991. Captain John Bledsoe is flying his A-6 Intruder over Kuwait at dawn. What he sees below him stops him cold. A traffic jam. Miles and miles of vehicles bumper to bumper trying to flee north on Highway 80 toward Basra. Tanks, armored vehicles, trucks, buses, stolen Kuwaiti cars, thousands of vehicles packed together. Some are military, some are civilian. All of them are trying to escape Kuwait before the American and coalition ground forces catch them. Bledsoe gets on the radio. "We've got the entire Iraqi army trying to bug out. They're sitting ducks." Welcome back to Gulf War Chronicles. Today we're talking about one of the most controversial and devastating attacks of Desert Storm, the Highway of Death. In less than 24 hours, coalition aircraft turned a 6-lane highway into the most infamous stretch of road in modern warfare. The images shocked the world, and some people say they're the reason President Bush ended the war when he did. Let's talk about what really happened on Highway 80. First, let's set the scene. By February 26th, the ground war had been going for just over 48 hours. The Iraqi army in Kuwait was collapsing. Saddam Hussein had ordered a withdrawal. He was calling it a strategic repositioning, but everyone knew it was a retreat. Iraqi units were abandoning their positions and heading north toward the Iraqi border as fast as they could. Problem was, there were only a few major roads out of Kuwait. Highway 80, the main route from Kuwait City to Basra, became a bottleneck. Now here's what made this different from a normal military retreat. The Iraqis weren't just taking military equipment. During their occupation of Kuwait, they'd looted everything that wasn't nailed down. Kuwaiti cars, trucks, buses, fire engines, ambulances, you name it, they stole it. And they were trying to take it all back to Iraq. So mixed in with the military convoy were hundreds, maybe thousands, of stolen civilian vehicles loaded with loot. Television sets, furniture, jewelry, anything of value. Coalition intelligence spotted this massive convoy forming. General Schwarzkopf and his commanders had a decision to make. These were enemy forces retreating, which made them legitimate military targets, but they were also fleeing, not fighting. Do you let them go and risk them reorganizing to fight another day? Or do you destroy them while you have the chance? The decision was made: hit them hard. The attack started in the early morning hours of February 26th. Navy A-6s from the aircraft carrier USS Ranger went in first. Their tactic was simple but devastating. Hit the front of the convoy to block the road. Hit the back of the convoy to trap everyone. Then work your way through the middle. Captain Steve Weatherspoon was one of the first pilots on scene. He dropped cluster bombs on vehicles at the front of the column. Massive explosions. Vehicles burst into flames. The highway was now blocked. Nobody could go forward. Russo is overwhelmed. He'd thought of his action as a small thing, 6 tons of food, a few hours of work, but for Kim's family it was everything, the difference between starvation and survival. Russo starts wondering how many other families he'd helped. How many of those 3,000 refugees survived because of those 6 tons? He'll never know the exact number, but the ripple effects are real. In 1975, Russo receives another letter. This one is from a woman in California. Writes, "My name is Grace Kim. I was 8 years old at Hungnam in 1950. I remember an American soldier giving my mother bread. I ate that bread. It was the first food I'd had in 3 days. I want to thank you. I'm a nurse now. I have 2 children. My life started with that bread." Russo keeps the letters. Over the years, he receives about 30 of them, all from Korean refugees who were at Hungnam in December 1950, all remembering the American cook who gave away food. Some of them tracked him down specifically. Others heard about him through the Korean-American community and wrote hoping he was the right person. Each letter tells a story, a family that survived, a child who grew up, a life that continued because of 6 tons of food that was supposed to be destroyed. Russo never sought recognition. He didn't tell the story publicly. He just kept the letters in a box and thought about them occasionally. But in 1985, a Korean-American journalist hears about Russo from one of the letter writers. The journalist contacts Russo, asks to interview him. Russo is reluctant. says he didn't do anything special, but the journalist persists, explains that the Hungnam Evacuation is a major event in Korean American history. Many Korean Americans today are descendants of refugees evacuated from Hungnam. They want to know the stories, who helped them, who saved them. Russo agrees to the interview. The journalist publishes a story in a Korean American newspaper, The Cook Who Fed Hungnam's Refugees. The response is overwhelming. Russ receives 200+ letters in the next month. Korean Americans across the country saying their parents or grandparents were at Hungnam, asking if Russo remembers them, thanking him for what he did. Russo is stunned. He had no idea his actions had affected so many people. He tries to respond to every letter, but it's too many. He's 60 years old now, retired, living on a pension. He doesn't have the resources to manage this level of correspondence. A group of Korean Americans in Los Angeles hears about Russo's situation. They organize a tribute event. They invite Russo to Los Angeles, all expenses paid, to meet with Hungnam Evacuation survivors and their families. Russo attends in October 1985. About 300 people show up. Most of them weren't at Hungnam themselves, but their parents or grandparents were. They want to thank Russo on behalf of their families. Russo is introduced. He's asked to say a few words. He's not a public speaker. He's a retired mess sergeant, but he tries. I didn't think what I did was important. I just saw people who needed food and I had food to give. That seemed simple. But hearing from all of you, learning about the lives that continued because of that food, it's overwhelming. I'm glad I disobeyed orders that day. I'd do it again. The room erupts in applause. People are crying. These are second and third generation Korean Americans who exist because their ancestors made it out of Hungnam. And part of the reason they made it out was because a stubborn cook refused to dump food in the ocean. After the event, Russo meets individually with dozens of attendees. They show him photos of their families, tell him stories about their parents' and grandparents' lives, show him what became of the refugees he'd fed. Doctors, teachers, business owners, engineers, families, lives, futures, all connected to 6 tons of food in December 1950. One woman, a doctor, tells Russo, "My grandmother was at Hungnam. She was pregnant with my mother. She hadn't eaten in 4 days. Your food kept her alive. My mother was born 3 months later in Busan. I exist because you gave my grandmother bread. Thank you." Russo has no words. He just nods and cries. The journalist who started this, the one who first interviewed Russo, writes a follow-up story. The ripples of 6 tons, how one sergeant's disobedience saved generations. The story gets picked up by mainstream media. Time magazine runs a piece about Russo. The story resonates because it's about unintended consequences. Russo made a small decision, feed some refugees. He thought it was just one meal, but that one meal kept people alive long enough to evacuate, to survive, to have children and grandchildren. The ripple effects are still continuing in 1985, 35 years later. The Army hears about the story, and they face an awkward situation. Russo violated orders. Technically, what he did in 1950 was unauthorized distribution of military property, but prosecuting him now, 35 years later, for feeding refugees, that's a PR nightmare. So the Army does something clever. They issue a statement saying that Russo's actions, while not in accordance with standard procedures at the time, reflected the humanitarian values of the U.S. military. It's a non-apology apology. They're not saying he was right. They're not saying he was wrong. They're just acknowledging it happened and moving on. Russo doesn't care about the Army's statement. He cares about the letters, the families, the lives. In 1990, Russo is invited to South Korea. The Korean government wants to honor him. They're organizing a 40th anniversary commemoration of the Hungnam Evacuation. Russo is hesitant. He's 65 years old, health isn't great, hasn't traveled internationally in years, but his family encourages him. His children say, "Dad, you need to see what you did. You need to meet these people in their own country." Russo goes to South Korea in December 1990. The commemoration is held in Seoul. Over 1,000 people attend. Most of them are Hungnam Evacuation survivors or their descendants. Russ is introduced as one of the Americans who helped save Korean civilians during the evacuation. He's given an award by the Korean government, a medal for humanitarian service. The citation mentions his selfless distribution of food to refugees during a critical evacuation. But the real impact comes after the ceremony. Russo spends 3 days meeting with Korean families. They take him to their homes, show him their lives, introduce him to their children and grandchildren. One family takes him to their family restaurant. They serve him a traditional Korean meal. The grandmother, who was at Hungnam, says through a translator, "This restaurant exists because I survived to start it. My children run it now. My grandchildren will inherit it. All of this started because you gave me food when I was starving. This meal is for you. Thank you." Russo is crying again. He's cried more in the past 5 years than in his entire previous life. Another family, successful business people, tells him, "Our father made it out of Hungnam. He always said an American soldier gave him bread. He told us that story many times. He died 10 years ago. But he made us promise, if we ever found that American soldier, we would thank him. We're keeping that promise. Thank you." Russo realizes something during this trip. His 6 tons of food didn't just save individuals. It saved families, communities, entire family trees that wouldn't exist if those refugees had starved. The scale of impact is incomprehensible. Russo returns to the United States changed. He starts speaking publicly about his experience. Not to brag, but to make a point. Small actions matter. Individual decisions made in moments can have enormous consequences. You never know who you're affecting. In 1995, Russo is diagnosed with cancer, terminal. He has maybe a year left. His family is devastated, but Russo is at peace. He tells his children, "I've had a good life. And I got to see what that food did. I got to meet the people it saved. Not many people get that kind of closure. I'm grateful." During his final year, Russo receives a steady stream of visitors. Korean Americans who heard he was sick and wanted to thank him before he died. Some of them traveled across the country. They bring him food, traditional Korean dishes. They tell him stories about their families, about their lives, about how it all connects back to Hungnam. One visitor, a man in his 50s, tells Russo, "My mother was 8 years old at Hungnam. She's 53 now. She has Alzheimer's. She doesn't remember much, but she remembers the American soldier who gave her food. She still talks about it. She wanted me to find you and say thank you." Russo is weak by this point, can barely speak. But he manages. "Tell her she's welcome. Tell her I'm glad she made it." Joseph Russo dies in September 1996. He's 71 years old. His funeral is attended by over 200 people. About half are Korean Americans who never met him until the last few years of his life. But they came because he saved their parents or grandparents 46 years ago. The eulogy is given by his son, Michael. He talks about his father's life, career in the army, raising 4 children, working as a restaurant manager after retirement. And then he talks about Hungnam. "My dad didn't think he was a hero. He thought he was just a cook doing his job. But his job, as he saw it, was feeding people. Not just soldiers, people. And when he had food and there were starving people in front of him, he fed them. That's who he was. That's his legacy. Not the military career or the medals, the food, the lives, the families that exist because he refused to waste 6 tons of food." After the funeral, Russo's family establishes a small scholarship fund, the Joseph Russo Humanitarian Scholarship. It's for Korean American students studying nutrition, social work, or humanitarian fields. The fund is small, maybe $2,000 per year, but it's funded by donations from Korean American families who were touched by Russo's story. The first scholarship is awarded in 1997. The recipient is Grace Kim, the woman who wrote to Russo in 1975 about the bread he gave her mother. She's now a nurse. She receives the scholarship to pursue a master's degree in public health. She says in her acceptance speech, "Joe Russo gave my mother bread when I was 8 years old. That bread saved my life. Now I'm dedicating my career to making sure other children don't go hungry. That's Joe's legacy continuing." By 2000, the scholarship fund has grown. Korean American organizations across the country contribute. It's not about the money. It's about the principle. Russo saved lives. Now they're honoring that by supporting people who want to save lives. The fund now provides about $20,000 per year in scholarships. 20 years after Russo's death, in 2016, there's a 66th anniversary commemoration of the Hungnam Evacuation. It's held in Washington, D.C. Several of Russo's children attend. So do about 50 Korean Americans whose families were at Hungnam. During the event, a documentary filmmaker interviews Russo's daughter, Patricia. He asks, "Did your father ever regret disobeying orders to save those refugees?" Patricia smiles. "No, never. He said it was the easiest decision he ever made. He had food, they needed food, everything else was just paperwork." The filmmaker asks, "What do you think he'd say if he could see the impact his decision had? All these families, all these lives." Patricia thinks about it. "He'd probably say the same thing he always said. I was just doing my job. Any cook would have done the same." But that's not true. Most cooks would have followed orders. My dad chose people over regulations. That's what made him special. Here's what Joseph Russo's story teaches us. First, that individual actions have ripple effects we can't predict. Russo fed 3,000 refugees one meal, but that meal saved lives that created families that built communities. Second, that sometimes the right thing to do is disobey orders. Russo was told to destroy food. He fed people instead. He was technically wrong but morally right. Third, that we often don't see the impact of our actions until much later. Russo thought he'd just given away some food. 35 years later, he learned he'd saved generations. Fourth, that purpose matters more than protocol. Russo's purpose was feeding people. When protocol conflicted with purpose, he chose purpose. And fifth, that legacy isn't about titles or recognition. It's about lives touched and futures enabled. Russo died as a retired master sergeant. No general stars, no Medal of Honor, but his legacy is hundreds of families who exist because he refused to waste food. That's real impact. That's meaningful. That's worth remembering. Today, there are an estimated 5,000 to 7,000 Americans who are descendants of the refugees Russo fed at Hungnam. They're doctors, teachers, business owners, parents, grandparents. They live across the United States. Most of them don't know about Joseph Russo, but they're alive because of him. Because one cook in December 1950 saw starving people and decided that orders didn't matter as much as humanity. Remember Master Sergeant Joseph Russo, the cook who wouldn't waste food, the 6 tons that saved 3,000 refugees, and the ripple effects that are still continuing today, 75 years later. That's legacy. That's impact. That's what happens when you choose people over paperwork. Russo understood that, and 5,000 descendants are grateful he did.